Hey, everybody. Welcome to Table Talk. I'm glad that you're here with us on this beautiful Monday morning here in Pennsylvania. It's also a beautiful Monday morning in Northern California. I have my friend
Yes.
Dave Myers, who some of you guys, I think, remember from here serving here at Table Life Church as an associate pastor and also connected to one of our awesome families here at the church with Frank and Nancy Myers and siblings. So welcome, Dave. Thanks for joining us. Even though we're like in the future, right? Here in
It's
Pennsylvania,
true, you are.
I'm in the
3 hours in
future.
the future.
Yeah, there we go. You're in the past.
Yep, it's awesome to be with you guys.
Yeah, yeah. So, Dave, why don't you just share a little bit about what you're up to, where you serve? That would be great for our listeners to know.
Yeah, for sure. So, Julia and the kids and I just arrived in Concord, California in July. So about the same time that Pastor Kris got to Table Life Church, we got to Christ Community Church of the Nazarene in Concord, California. We're back now on the Northern California district, which is where we served in Petaluma for 11 years, which is where I met Julia. So kind of feeling like, this is her home area. It's kind of second home to me. Um, this congregation that we're serving is a really interesting one. They have a long history, going back 75 years, so similar age to Table Life, um, and we're a very large congregation. About 25 years ago, much smaller now. They've gone through a lot of really difficult circumstances as a congregation, um, and so are still really in a healing phase. We're also in the process of selling our building, the building that they've been in for about 65 years, and kind of becoming a nomadic church, at least for a little bit. So right now we're meeting in a church space owned by another congregation in town. I think that going forward, we probably won't purchase or buy or build another traditional church space, but we'll use some of those funds from the sale of the property to do some really creative things in the community, and that's, I think in a lot of ways what especially this area needs, to kind of see the church in action in some different ways. So we're excited for that, and just excited to see how God leads going forward.
Oh, that's awesome, Dave. Yeah,
Yep.
talk about a interesting way being. I like that you described it being kind of a nomadic congregation because I think that connects to our message from this past weekend. Looking at first starting our new series, "Were You There?" We're looking at the places that Jesus walked, and starting out in the wilderness, right? That sometimes it feels like wandering in the wilderness.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think just personally, I think the last few years, and I know I've related this before, but like I feel like it's almost been like we've been wandering and going, and it's like, okay, we're almost out, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then there's like
Yep.
this sense of like, like no, something else happens, or that
Yep.
this other event. Like there's a sense of like constancy or normalcy, or I think that expectation has changed, I think, in
Hmm.
the life of the church, I think in our society and our
Yeah.
culture, and I think with that sense of wilderness comes a lot of like doubts, right?
Mm.
And questioning. How have you seen that in your own life and ministry, especially like moving in the midst of COVID, just like I've done too,
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, what's going on,
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, for me personally, um, these last couple of years especially and it's been, kind of growing for a long time, but in the last couple of years, um, my faith has changed, I think in some significant ways, to be honest, because of that wilderness, a sort of wilderness. For me, it hasn't been, like incredibly traumatic experiences in the last couple of years, but just kind of a weight, that settles in from the pandemic experience, from, I think, the navigating church life in the last couple of years, which has been really difficult, for me, but for most pastors that I know. um, Seeing the decline of the church in many ways, seeing, during the pandemic, so many folks that moved away to different areas because they're able to work remotely, and
right?
and so the churches that I've been serving in, we've seen decline because of that. Yeah, I think just because of the cultural upheaval, that we've experienced with just such polarization, people pulled in so many different directions, and many people, I think, seeing the church struggle to respond in a way that's full of grace and love, and
Right.
instead often seeing the church respond by closing our doors even more, by pushing folks away who don't agree with us. A lot of folks that I know have walked away from faith because of that, or have, at least, as you talked about in your
Hmm.
sermon on Sunday, kind of lost Jesus in a sense, or lost where Jesus
Mm,
is in the church. And so I've seen that
good
to
point.
a certain extent for me, is I've just said, okay, so what does this look like? Um, not for me, not questioning Christ, um, but questioning what the church should look like in light of Christ, and saying maybe some of the ways that church has looked for a long time isn't really the way that it should look. And so trying to figure out as a pastor what that looks like is pretty challenging. But I think there's a lot of pastors in that place. And I think there's a lot of lay people in that place too. They're just
Yeah.
going, I've always known church in this way, but this feels different now. And it, in some ways, it feels like there's something missing, or there's something that needs to shift or change. And that's certainly a wilderness that is hard, but also hopefully produces some fruits of faithfulness, for the church going forward. And I've begun to see
Mm,
that in myself and in other folks that I'm walking with, that as we kind of begin to take apart some of those pieces of the church that don't really feel like they fit, you find something in the center that fits even better than what you've always had has fit, like a core of faithfulness that seems even more faithful to the way of Jesus, than some of the extra stuff that you've were kind of pulling off and going, this doesn't feel like it fits anymore.
right.
So
Right.
that's, been
Yeah.
an interesting journey.
Yeah, it's kind of like, over time, it's kind of the accumulation of things that that maybe we don't need that go have been going along with Jesus. I think of if ever I'm on a road trip or I'm visiting places, like, don't you always visit like the souvenir store, and there's all these like cutesy little things, yeah, and if you have kids, they're like, I want
Yep.
the little bird float, that's there,
Mhm.
whatever. And like you buy all this stuff, and then like you wind up like, especially when you move, you're like going through things and you're like, why do I have all this stuff? Like, I'm
Mhm.
never gonna like, I need to go through it and to realize, like, to sort through and say, yeah, what do I need to keep, but what is just stuff. And I think
Yeah.
it's the same way with Jesus, like that when we're moving in a wilderness time, it can be a good time to reassess those things. Like, have we accumulated things along with our faith in Christ that are not essential to that? Even things that I like,
Yeah.
for
Right.
instance, I saw somebody like posted this really interesting article yesterday. I think it was years back. Somebody, it was like a Dear Billy Graham column or something.
Mhm.
And it was really fascinating because somebody wrote like a question like, Billy Graham, like, I don't really like the music in the church. This was like maybe
I saw that. Yeah.
1990. Yeah, yeah. It was fascinating. Yeah. And it's like, I don't really like the music in the church. And should I talk to the music director or whatever about it? And Billy Graham, in essence, basically said, like, even the hymns and music that you like, at one time it was new.
Mhm.
And what if this time this needs to change to connect with people of this era, and putting
Yeah.
your maybe preferences aside? And and I was just reflecting on that, like, how many times do we like cling to the things that maybe are not essential
Mhm.
in our faith? And that could be, like you just said, that can be kind of distracting, and we
For
might
sure.
lose Jesus in the church.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, in that process, when there are things like that we have so identified with our faith journey,
Yeah,
when we lose those things, it feels like we don't have faith or church or Jesus anymore.
good point.
And so there's a loss there that you kind of have to navigate through, and go, do I still have Jesus even when I've lost these things that I've always connected to Jesus?
Right.
And yeah, I think that's an important part of the journey, honestly.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways that you have, on the flip side of things, rediscovered Jesus in the midst of the wilderness of the past couple years? What's come to mind?
Yeah. So for me, you know, contemplative prayer has always been an important part of my journey, but something that I think I began to lose a little bit in the midst of that questioning and wrestling and struggling. And so for me, a return to that, kind of a rediscovering of practices of contemplative prayer that I had set to the side for a little while have been so helpful.
That's awesome.
Um, and just the community of faith. I always just press into the vision of what the church can and should be and what it often is, um, when we are walking in faithfulness to Christ. So not following rules, not, not making sure that everything is, exactly in line with here's what I was taught. I do this, I don't do this. But man, when we're walking in faithfulness, caring for each other, loving the world around us, going out of our way to serve others, man, that's the faithfulness that always just draws me back and goes, and I go, this is what it should be, and this is what we have to be as followers of Jesus, full of grace and mercy and love, for ourselves, and for each other. And we overcomplicate it when we don't do that. And so just
Yeah.
returning to that in conversations with people, for myself, giving grace to myself, giving grace to those around me. I think those practices, along with that, the practice of contemplation, has been really significant. And then just reading good books, reading good folks that are maybe a little further along on that journey than I am, is always helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just begin, I think it helps form like, yeah, that new vision of who, not to say we're changing Jesus, but we're
Yeah,
catching a new angle almost, I think,
right.
for how he's at work today.
Yep.
Yeah. And I would say, like, in addition, I think, yeah, for me, and I think this goes along with, like, our name of Table of Life is the power of the table.
Hmm. Yep.
And how, like, if we're talking about, like, sharing our faith, if we're talking about building discipleship, we were growing in our faith and relationship with others and with Jesus, like, just the power of the table in those
Yeah.
things, and how the table is really the barrier breaker, because
Yep.
we're equal there. We all
Hmm.
need to eat. We're all beings that need sustenance. And how, like, intentionally sharing a meal with others, like, it breaks down those barriers and builds relationships.
Hmm.
And that
Yep.
all, and I feel like what, I don't know, I've been relearning is just the power of those relationships at the core of all we do.
Yep.
That
Yep.
sometimes, like, the core, like, the kind of the sideline of things, or the things we've accumulated, has been, well, worship is the core of the church.
Mhm.
It's actually not.
Yeah.
It's community.
Hmm.
It's
Yep.
relationships.
Yep.
I mean, that's what the early church did. The way they expressed that was through gatherings and being together and celebrating and singing. Um, but that's lived out of that piece. So
Yeah.
yeah, so just the power of those authentic relationships, and they don't just happen.
Yeah.
Like Jesus, like, he intentionally stopped at people's houses. He went out of his way to have conversations with people. And I think sometimes, for, like, our lives in the church, like, we become so ingrained in it that, like, all our friends are in the church. We don't spend
Hmm.
any time, we're in meetings up to here, and we consider that as doing ministry,
Yeah.
when it's not. It's having time and margin for those relationships, and
Yep.
but how powerful that is.
Mm.
So yeah, so I think I've just been rediscovering that kind of power piece,
Yep. Yep.
of
Love
that.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what brings you hope, Dave?
Um, what brings me hope? I
Besides Jesus,
think
I mean, we're talking about Jesus, but
obviously Jesus, yes, but um, I think conversations that I'm having, with folks who, really interestingly, some who have lost some faith in the church, and in the process are beginning to find Jesus in new ways. So
Mm,
people that, like you talked about on Sunday, have walked through the wilderness, have feared that they are losing Jesus, um, and then are finding Jesus in new and fresh ways. That's giving me hope,
awesome.
because I think that's important. Sometimes when we cling to certainty, with such a strong grip, um, believing that if we're certain about our faith, if we're certain about the things we believe, then we won't go through a wilderness. When in reality, sometimes loosening that grip on certainty helps us to have faith, because when there's absolute certainty, there's not really faith, right? um,
Mm.
and so I think beginning to walk through a wilderness of doubt and questioning sometimes actually brings a fresher and more solid faith in the end. And I'm seeing hope in folks, in myself and in others in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's never too late to like start that. I think sometimes we fear or shy away from asking questions or even expressing doubts or looking for answers. But I
Hmm.
think that can be a way of of strengthening. We're so afraid of losing, I think, that
Right.
we forget the winning piece.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I just
Yep.
don't want to lose. Like, yeah, I don't want to lose my Jesus. I don't want to lose my faith. I don't want to. So therefore, I'm not going to do that. But what could you gain?
Yeah.
What if you frame that? What could you gain? How could your relationship with Christ become even stronger and more powerful in how you live that out?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Absolutely.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Dave. Yeah, thanks for joining us and taking some
Yeah.
time. And I'm sure,
My
yeah,
pleasure.
folks that are watching, are fishing a familiar face, and those of you who don't know Dave, hopefully we'll see you back for a visit sometime to see your
Yep.
parents here and brother and everything. So
Yep.
yeah,
We're looking forward to that day when
yeah.
plane tickets come down just a little bit in
Oh, I
price.
know it.
Man, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, for sure. Maybe
Yeah,
we'll
we're
take a
looking forward
field
to
trip
coming
out
back.
to Cali.
That sounds good. Table Life Church, come on out.
There we go. No, awesome. Very cool. Well, blessings on your church and ministry too, Dave. We
Yep,
really,
you as
really
well.
appreciate you and everything. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us for Table Talk. Like I said, every week we talk about the message and just really dive into conversation because it's good to chat about. And hopefully if you're worshiping with us, and I think it's also online, there's a bunch of questions too in the worship guide. I'm just gonna like put that up to the screen that you can chew on. So it's what we call a doggy bag. Woof woof. And yeah, so I think just to process through, and I would encourage you to dive in, ask questions. Don't be afraid of the wilderness. Welcome it.
Mm.
So have a great week, guys. We hope to see you Sunday for the second installment of our series. And have a great week. Enjoy. Take care.